Thank you, Rebecca, and good morning, everyone. Can you understand Appalachian? That's the first thing I have to ask you. I figure this is an international campus, so accents are a thing of norm here as opposed to being an oddity. But it's a pleasure to be with you this morning and to share a few thoughts with you. I can't tell you how excited we are at the Griffin Foundation about our pending association as the Elizabeth R. Griffin Program here at the Center for Global Health Science and Security at Georgetown. We have worked in similar programs together in different places in the world, and to be connected to a program that has the national and international reputation that this one has I'm sliding off into semi-retirement, not permanent retirement, but semi-retirement. And it is one of the great successes of my career is making this link. I want to tell you just a little bit about the foundation and our history and what it is that got me into this room talking to you about biosafety. My undergraduate work, I have a double major in sociology and history, and my graduate work is in human resource development. So you're sitting there going, well, what the heck is he doing coming in here and talking to us about biosafety and global health security? In 1997, a young woman named Beth Griffin, big name was Elizabeth. Beth was a graduate of Agnes Scott College in Atlanta, Georgia. She had a double major in biology and dance and had a planned a future career working with animals, and she wanted to be a veterinarian. And you know about veterinary schools, most of the veterinary colleges in the United States, most of the students in those veterinary colleges come from the undergraduate programs in those colleges. There's a couple of exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's the way it works. My daughter-in-law is a veterinarian. She's the managing veterinarian of the spay-neuter clinics in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. She went to Auburn. She was a competitive diver there. She did her undergrad at Auburn. Guess where she went to vet school? Auburn, as did 80% of her class, right? And then they have certain slots that are set aside for border states that they have agreements with. And so there's all that sort of thing. So she needed to beef up her CV a little bit, so she went to work as a non-human primate research worker at Yerkes in Atlanta. She was working in a company with a experiment one day and moving some monkeys from one cage to another and got splashed in the eye with some material out of the bottom of a cage, and from that splash in the eye, she contracted a macaque herpes B virus, which for macaques is like a human having a cold sore. For humans, it's like death. And in 6 weeks, she was dead. Now, what you need to back up about this is that when she graduated from Agnes Scott, her first career option was to be the dance captain at the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. The B virus is encephalitic, and she died within 6 weeks, but within 2.5 she was paralyzed from the neck down. So she would have never been the same thing. Well, her family, upon her death, started a foundation to work with people who work with non-human primates in research to work on occupational health and safety issues. Beth's death came about as a result of ignorance, not stupidity, and there is a difference. Ignorance is when you don't know any better. Beth was the first person we know of to contract the macaque B virus through an ocular exposure. So the common knowledge of the time was you don't get it unless there's a bite or a scratch. So you really didn't worry about it unless there was that bite or scratch. And so they kept telling her that, no, that can't be a possibility because you don't have a bite, you don't have a scratch. Even though Dr. Julia Hilliard, who happened to be in Atlanta and who happens to be the foremost expert in the world on B virus, was saying, she's got B virus. You need to treat her prophylactically for B virus. And they're like, no, we're the medical doctors, we know what we're doing. They didn't. And that was ignorance. Stupidity is if you do the same thing again, right? Stupid is when you know better and do it anyway. So the whole idea behind the foundation was to work with these non-human primates. Well, Bill and Carol, that was Beth's parents. The father died a few years ago of lung cancer. which is really warped because this is a guy that bicycled through the Alps, never smoked a cigarette in his life. But when they set up the foundation, they thought this non-human primate research world would just beat a path to their door, wanting to know, how can we do things better? Well, if you know anything about laboratory animal research, you know that that is one of the more closed worlds out there. You just don't go out there and say, guess what we do here? And so they needed somebody to build a relationship with those people who worked with non-human primates, and I had done a lot of other kind of side stuff during my 30-year teaching career. And among those things was working with his medical practice, and I'd also been a lobbyist and all those other kind of little things that you do otherwise. And so they just wanted to get this ball rolling, and I knew absolutely nothing about it, but I learned very quickly. They decided they would invest in me because I knew Beth. She had been a former student of mine. And they said, go find things to learn. So the first group I met was the Association of Primate Veterinarians. I didn't even know there was such a thing. It's a whole group of people that work with monkeys. And I met with them and began a relationship with that group. And it was a wonderful group of people with whom to work. And this was at the time, I have to explain this. This is one of those, as I look back over what's happening, it was for the most part at that time an old boys club, right? It was like 90% men. And it was an old boys club because most of them had had military experience. They came up as vets in the forest health divisions. They had been at USAMRIT, and they've been at Lawrence Livermore, and they've been at the CDC. They'd had all these different cross path kind of things. It's interesting now because that group is more than half women. So the transition has significantly taken part there. But I got these guys, really excited and all this kind of stuff. And then 2001 rolled around, y'all had the Amerithrax thing when the biosecurity thing kind of ramped up. And that touched us peripherally, but not much. But in 2003, the SARS outbreak occurred. Now, I'm telling you people things that you already know, but this is just how I got into this room. The global response to SARS was to build laboratories all over the world. High containment laboratories all over the world. Okay? And the people who had experience working in high containment laboratories were non-human primate veterinarians. This was like the core of knowledge in working, particularly on the animal side, in high containment research. These guys had mostly been at USAMRIT, which is the birthplace of biosafety to begin with. And they came to us and said, if you're trying to keep any more Beth Griffin things from happening, you're going to need to get in more into biosafety. Because, as one of them said, one of my DARPA buddies said, they're building planes and they don't have pilots. So I got to learn all about biosafety, and here I am. So that world just kind of expanded and expanded and expanded. But these are pictures of Beth. Now, I always like to show this one back down in the bottom right-hand corner because there's Beth holding a monkey not wearing eye protection. You see that? And if you work around macaques now, you certainly wear eye protection because of Beth. If you work with macaques now, you probably carry a card because of Beth that says, if I'm exhibiting these symptoms, take a sample of my blood, send it to this lab, start me on a cyclovir like now. And we'll talk about, because I am the zebra, not the horse. And there are a number of people who do that who work with other infectious agents as well, which is a good thing. And I never miss an opportunity to tell people that if you work in a situation where a biological risk exposure is a possibility, to always tell your personal physician what it is exactly that you do for a living. How important that is. Because they know where you work, but they have no idea what you do. They know about your insurance, trust me on that. They know what is covered and what isn't covered, but they don't know what it is exactly that you do. And I've done this for years and years and years, giving talks everywhere, telling people, tell your physician exactly what you do. Just sit there and look at them. Tell him or her what it is that you do. A couple of years ago, I'm watching a football game. I just recently got back from a trip, but I'm watching a football game. And somehow right after halftime, my temperature went from perfectly normal to like 104. My wife says it goes up a degree every time I give this talk. But I went from happily watching a football game and drinking a beer on a Sunday afternoon to having conversations with Jesus, okay? And my wife called my physician. And the first question he asked her was, where has he been? Because what he wanted to do, I'm the zebra in his office, I travel a lot. And so what he wanted to do was to eliminate those external possibilities. I think he probably has pneumonia, but let's check and see if there's anything going on where he's been. It was pneumonia. It wasn't fun. All right, I love this picture. And here's where I want to kind of touch in on the Georgetown thing. I need you to understand that I'm really not a technical expert. I know enough biosafety and biosecurity to be dangerous. I've had probably a couple of thousand hours of training in it, but I've never been a biosafety officer anywhere. Okay? Ever. I've never been in charge of biosecurity anywhere. People that work with me, they describe me, and I take this as a compliment, but it's like you're kidding. They call me a thought leader because I drop what someone once affectionately called gym bombs. Because I come from the perspective of not being a technical expert. I'm in that limbo land between what science is doing and what the public knows. I'm in that limbo land between what science needs and what the public needs. Because I can understand a little of both because I work with both very well. Now, even though I'm dressed as the expert, notice I have the pinstripe kind of suit. I have my Academy of Science Malaysia tie on. I have wingtips, the ultimate, and the receding hairline. But I'm behind this guy. And one of the things that I have noticed is that there are these institutions at the top, right? So when Carol Griffin Russell, who is the founder of the foundation that I work for, as I'm not only the executive director, I'm the IT department, I do just, you name it, I do it, clean up my own office. When we were talking about both of us wanting to go into some sort of semi-retirement, I have 4 grandchildren. She has grandchildren. When we're talking about this, we were looking at all the possibilities, and I said, what if we could link up with somebody? One of the things I wanted to make sure was that the group that I linked up with was up there on the top. And that's one of the reasons that I'm just really, really excited that all this is coming about. We're having fun with lawyers and things like that, right? Because I can't figure out why they like to drag things out, especially ours, because ours bill by the hour. We're looking forward to the formal part of that first, but I think it will be. I truly, not only belong to think, in my heart, it's going to be just an absolutely tremendous alliance between the connections that they have and the connections that we've established over the years. And I just think it will be a great leap forward for biosafety and biosecurity, and particularly in terms of global health security. So I want to thank them very much for accommodating all this. When I speak, I am normally thunder in the desert. If you understand the reference of thunder in the desert. Because I spend a lot of times talking to groups to whom this is totally foreign, or I spend a lot of times talking to groups that need to hear some sort of great inspirational message. I am Mr. Safety Day. Let me tell you, I've given more keynotes at more safety days at more different places. It's Safety Day. And here's the other thing. I have learned that when it's Safety Day somewhere, when they're having Safety Day, when they're investing in bringing me to talk, right? The fecal material has hit the wind propulsion machine. And I'm part of their cleanup activity, right? They have gotten themselves in an area of complacency. And one of the things that we have to understand in all environments, here's the sociology part. In all environments, unwritten rules are much stronger than the written ones. And biosafety and biosecurity is a world full of written rules and policies. And you can write those until the cows come home. But the unwritten ones will win every day. So when Beth has her eye things dangling around her neck, that's because the rule was you have to wear them. The unwritten rule is you wear them down around your neck. Because it's Atlanta, Georgia, people. You put goggles on your face. You just say the words Atlanta and Georgia together and you sweat. You put goggles on your face and they fog up. So the unwritten rule is put them on if somebody important walks by. Right? It's kind of like the don't eat in the lab. Well, if you're going to eat in the lab, put your food in the drawer. Unwritten rule. Unwritten rule is how fast do you drive on the highway. Written rule is the sign. Unwritten rule is how fast everybody drives, right? What will they let you get away with? That's true everywhere you go. So what I try to bring things into is I recognize the importance of rules and regulations and policies, and I work with those a lot and work in the development of those a lot, but I also work with people. And I know how people respond to those kinds of things, wherever they may go. I was at a Global Health Security Agenda Steering Group meeting in Geneva a while back, and this was part of the presentation and from the WHO. And I love the question, are we prepared? You know, the whole thing behind the Global Health Security Agenda is the are we prepared for the next pandemic to come our way? And the whole initiative is to get countries up because those international health regulations were rules, but what was the unwritten rule? These are countries, people. Yeah, we'll do that. Of course we will. Yeah. Work on it here, work on it there. Put it up on the shelf. I share this with you in my teaching career, and I did this kind of work part-time for a while. I retired from teaching in 2006. There was a thing called No Child Left Behind. I was in charge of community relations for my school, which meant I kept a notebook on what we did for community relations. I'm sitting at my desk. There was no money involved in this, by the way. I'm sitting at my desk one night at 7 o'clock, filling out this notebook stuff and it dawned on me that nobody anywhere at any time was ever going to see this, and somebody in every public school in America was doing this. I could write in there Bozo the Clown or something like that. Nobody would know. And every time somebody talks about IHRs and countries, I go back to, oh yeah, I know what they're doing. Because they're filling in those papers and going, nobody's ever going to look at this because everybody thinks it's not going to happen here. Now here's the power behind the Global Health Security Agenda, and why I think it's more than just another political kind of thing, is it's actually got checkpoints involved in it. It actually has this joint external evaluation process, and it actually talks about how are you going to fund these things, and all these other discussions come in from a multi-sectoral approach. And that's a very powerful thing, and it's one of those things I don't think we can lose. But when it comes to the part about biosafety, one of the things that this guy had in his slide is this picture down here, and you probably can't see it too well, but it's during the Ebola outbreak where people are wearing gear as if they were, dealing in a level 4 lab, right? They're suited up to the max. And that's in a part of the world worse than Atlanta, Georgia, right, when it comes to heat. So how people walked around in Tyvek suits and all that, I have no idea. I can imagine that it was. But that's a biosafety thing. And are we prepared? One of those action packages deals with biosafety and biosecurity. And are we prepared is very key to biosafety when it comes to responding to an emerging infectious disease. Whether it's in an animal population, a human population, or both. It is not a sidebar issue. I love this because it's like one of the three pictures. Let me go on here. Now, today, I am singing to the choir. So I told my wife, she said, what are you going to talk about at Georgetown? I said, well, I'm going to use this choir thing. Now, I cannot sing. I always wanted to sing. I sing in the car when I'm by myself. I can't carry a tune in a bucket, as they say. My wife is a singer. She can do Handel. She can do Patsy Cline. She can sing. She's in choirs. I'm like, oh, and she started telling me more about choirs than I ever wanted to know in doing this. But I was just kind of like using the expression singing to the choir. I go to a lot of meetings just like this, listen to people just like me, and hear things I have already heard. And I nod my head, okay? Handel's Messiah, I know that, I can sing along with you. But there are different people who have different interests in this room. Just like if you were in a choir, we'd have different people who could sing in different voice ranges, right? The only time I ever got into a choral group, I was in the 7th grade and my voice had changed. And the music teacher put me in the chorus because on Drill Ye Terriers Drill, there was this thing that you go drill, drill, drill. And that was my job. On the other songs, I was to move my lips. All right. So we got in our choir here, we're going to talk about biosafety. And if I had a truly mixed audience, I'd have people who actually do biosafety. Is there anybody in this room that actually does biosafety? Good. Got two. You can go all the way up. All right. So I've got two people. We'll call these implementers. They're biosafety people. They really know what I'm talking about. Okay? They do the biosafety stuff. Policy people. Policy people. Let's see you. Yay, policy people. Okay? All right, now policy people sometimes have experience in biosafety, sometimes not. What they usually have experience in is the science and the ability to define and to write policy and connect, right? This is where they are. So these are the policy people, right? And then the third group is the people for whom these people and these people affect. So when I'm doing Mr. Safety Day, and I tell them, tell me about my audiences. I want you to bring people in. I want to meet with the scientists. I want to meet with blah, blah, blah. I want all these people in the room together. I tell them also I want the management in there. But these are the people whom those policies affect and these people work with. Although if you're a biosafety person and you're an implementer, you have absolutely no authority to do anything at all, usually, ever. Okay? These people bring the money in wherever it is they are, okay? And they are the royalty in their institutions. And policy stuff, wherever it is, no matter what the policy is nothing but a pain in the tush. Okay? What do you mean I have to do that? That adds cost, that adds time, that adds this, that adds that. So the message is heard 3 different ways. Let's compound this a little bit more. Globally speaking, we speak 3 different languages. We speak biosafety. We talk about biosafety. We talk about biorisk management. I've had people in the world ask me what the difference between biosafety and biorisk management is. The people that teach biosafety don't understand that. The people that teach biorisk management don't understand that. The people who sit in these audiences that have these training people that come through every year on the one and done kind of missions, they want to know what the difference between biosafety and biorisk management is. And then we have the biosecurity people who are strictly on the biosecurity side. And when I say strictly on the biosecurity side, these are the people who interrelate, particularly in other countries. These are the governments or the government agencies and stuff that interact with the science community on the security side. It can be military, it can be law enforcement, it can be, game wardens, all that kind of stuff. It can be a different audience altogether. And I assure you that this audience does not speak the same language as either this one or this one. Okay? They have a whole different mentality about things. So it's not as simple as it first appears. It's like the idea that somebody, and this comes again from that education thing, that you can walk into a classroom and every child in there is going to learn everything you teach them, and then some. That's just not going to happen. So what you have to do, I love this. This is a painting of the signing of the Constitution. Told you I was a history teacher. Can't let you out of that. Years ago, when I first got connected into the biosecurity thing, I met with Homeland Security in an office in Frederick, Maryland. It was a nondescript little office next to a dental office. I go in the place, it's like a science fiction film. You know, you go in, you have this little receptionist, and you sign in, except you do a thumbprint thing, and then you sit down and wait. And then you go into the back, and they have all these screens up, and I'm like, holy cow, I'm doing my Gomer Pyle. Golly! Now, I had been invited to this meeting. It was in Frederick, Maryland. It was 0830. These are things I remember very distinctly. I'd spent the night in the Fairfield Inn in Frederick, Maryland. I was there in time to be at my 0830 meeting. This guy walks in who's obviously a retired colonel and now doing, something else. He sits at the head of the meeting. He looks around and says, all right, so who do we need at the next meeting? And I'm like, wait a minute. The first thing on the agenda is we're going to have a next meeting, which means I could have just skipped this one. So I learned the ways of those kind of meetings. But I also learned an important lesson. He looked around the room after we did our meeting. He said, who's missing? Who is it that needs to be in this room if this is what we're going to talk about? And this is often something we do not do. And the reason I use this painting of the U.S. Constitution and the formers is who's missing in that picture? Who's missing? Anybody who's not an old white guy pretty much is missing. This is pretty much the landed gentry and the intelligentsia of the time. And having those people missing is going to create some issues on down the road. So when you're doing these things out there in the world, always ask yourself who's missing. Make sure you reach out for them, otherwise you're going to have issues. Now the other thing, have you ever traveled overseas and forgot to take your little adapter thing with you? All right? What we do in biosafety and biosecurity, the goal of it needs to be that it works with an adapter. That what we come up with is local, practical, and sustainable. That's been an ever-going sermon for mine. Because without it being local, without it being practical, without it being sustainable, it is not going to be effective. If you take what you do in a first world lab and expect to immediately apply it in a developing world scenario, you're kidding yourself. It's not going to work. There are training issues, there are infrastructure issues, there are all kinds of issues that are beyond most people's imagination. And how they go about just repairing things is a whole different world. So it takes a special skill to be able to adapt. Because what we have a tendency to do, and this is not necessarily such a bad thing, but we have a tendency to try to make it a uniform thing, so wherever it is, we can plug it in and it's going to work here. Not the adapter thing, but let's make this kind of a uniform type thing. Now, if I had one of my wishes to come true, which rarely I do, but if I had one of my wishes to come true, I would say, if we could go back and do things all over again, wouldn't it be fun to do Linda Lab, and send these mobile labs out that had the same kind of equipment everywhere they were, and everybody could be trained in the same way and all this. But one of the things that we do internationally, we have the IFB certification program now, right? So we're measuring people to a level of competency. But Biorisk Management was built on the SIN Workshop Agreement. And the SIN Workshop Agreement is moving to ISO kind of things. These are more plug-in than they are adaptable. I got news for you. The rest of the world's not quite ready for this one yet. But we're first world people who have what I call disposable intellectual time. Disposable intellectual time is time that we can devote to doing things like coming up with international standards for stuff. Understand that most workforces don't have that. They don't have that kind of disposable time. If they don't have the disposable time to come up with it, what makes you think they have the disposable time to implement it? So those are the kind of things we just have to keep in mind. All right, so the whole idea behind the Global Health Security Agenda, here we are, choir, everybody knows these things. We want to prevent avoidable catastrophes, right? I like the idea that there is a catastrophe that cannot be avoided. We want to detect threats early and respond rapidly and effectively. Every meeting I go to that has an international audience wants to know why the Global Health Security Agenda does not apply to chronic diseases that are endemic in countries. Why is the focus and the funding always directed at emerging infectious diseases? And these are gem bombs. I'm just dropping these for you so you can hear this, all right? Because when we get into the what's in it for me kind of thing, they hear what we're saying back here, and they hear what they're saying in Europe and places like that. And our concern about the threat of emerging infectious diseases, we'll throw up an airplane and say, one of these people is going to get on a plane and come here. And if they do that, the economic catastrophe that will occur, right? Now that's an important message for policymakers and funders in places, because they're saying, why do I need to worry about emerging infectious diseases in Sierra Leone? I'm not going to Sierra Leone. Excuse me, one of those people in Sierra Leone may get on an airplane, they may go to, and let's talk about where all they're going through. Last week I was at a meeting of the Georgia Global Health Alliance. And it was a very interesting meeting, and because one of the things they talked about was how many international passengers a year pass through the Atlanta airport. Okay? And Atlanta, these are people, there are people that live in Atlanta who work in the Atlanta airport, right? So if they're exposed in the Atlanta airport and go home, now we're talking about, that's what's in it. And they talk about how much it is to the economy of Georgia, this travel kind of thing. And what could happen if one of those things breaks down. I want you to understand that that's a very legitimate thing to put to policy holders. But when we present that to an international audience, it's offensive. You hear me? Because a lot of what we're saying is they're not prepared to take care of us if something happens there. And if we really want this to be effective, we've got to talk in a language that shows that we care about where this is that it breaks out. Now, I've got an answer when the part about why does this not apply to chronic conditions? Why is this not being applied? I am saying eventually it will be, because it adds to capacity. And I talked to a hospital manager last week. I said, I want you to tell me something. This is just kind of crass, but this is just, I said, is your business model built on chronic diseases? Well, no, not exactly. I said, but when you build a hospital somewhere, you anticipate that there's going to be X number of cardio patients based on the population, X number of people coming in with problems with diabetes, X number of people coming in with drug-related issues. Yeah. Okay? So chronic health conditions are those things which actually build capacity in the first place. And what our problem is when an emerging infectious disease takes place, is because it is that chronic health thing that builds the business model for the healthcare, is that there's no additional space. Let's talk about some of these other things. The idea of security itself, and the wall here is strictly apolitical. Yeah, right. The security is to say that there are vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Right? And just to kind of further this picture up, when we talk about security, we're talking about one side of the wall and the other side of the wall. And this is a language that we've got to kind of blend our way out of. We've got to take down the whole idea of the wall in terms of our discussion about how these diseases affect the world. One of the biggest vulnerabilities is in biosafety and biosecurity, by far, because they have what I call the bio trifecta. This is infection control, this is biosafety, and this is biosecurity. And the real trick, and I have to, this is where watching Georgetown at work, this is one of the wonderful kind of things. They're really good at linking these together. I've been places in training sessions where it's really not so good. And the idea is that one of the things that we know from a funder standpoint is that the suitcase that carries biosafety training or biorisk management, the funding suitcase, is biosecurity. It's in there. Now, do you honestly think that the world that's receiving this lesson doesn't understand that? Okay? That it's biosecurity. And that when we talk about biosecurity, we're talking about intentional use. We're talking about nefarious, or we're talking about making sure that people don't do things in a certain way, because again, that's part of the ultimate threat, and it is a threat. Let's be perfectly honest about that. It is a threat, particularly where there are economic situations which fuel the attractiveness of those things. One of my favorite cartoons that I ran across in doing all this, unintended results. I hope you can pick up on this. The guy's got a little can of non-stick spray. He's a stick man. I have to explain this to people. And then on the other side, the sticks are gone. Our intentions sometimes are wonderful. The results sometimes not so much. And here's one of the things that I've observed. This is strictly anecdotal. Maybe Georgetown can give me millions of dollars and I can go do a research project to fund this. Throughout the world, where the United States and the Global Partners Program and other type have funded biosafety and biosecurity training for literally thousands of people all over the world. Noble endeavor. Those people have gone back to work, and one of two things has happened. One, they got so far behind in the work that they have that when they got back, they couldn't do the new work that they were trained to do, because they had to catch up on the work that they didn't do while they were being trained, because they don't have the human resource capacity. Again, it's one of those, understand that. So they get back, and their desk is piled up, and their boss needs them to do the work they do. And if you're an adult learner, here's the education part. If you don't apply what you've learned in 2 weeks, you lose it. It's really simple. Might as well not have learned it in the first place. 2 weeks, that's not very long, is it? All right? So what has to happen when they go through this training is it has to be immediately applicable or applicable within 2 weeks. Otherwise, it's highly ineffective. All right? That's part of the problem. The second problem is they go back and they get promoted. Okay? They get promoted out of what it is because they now have what we call a darling relationship with funders, which is good. And I need to put you out front. And I would go to program after program done by different organizations, and the same people in different parts of the world would be there for essentially the same kinds of training. And the reason they were there is they're now the darlings, right? The funders like them. I got it. This isn't important. I understand relationship work. I know what they're doing. They're putting these people in there, even though these people may not have the effectiveness in actually implementing what it is that you're training them to do. So let's wave a wand. This is a Lego guy with, with your little bulldog thing. Let's wave a wand. What would you do? I'm asking you this question. What would you do to try to keep that from happening so that the training was more effective? Or what have you done? Really, ideas. Tell me. This is your turn. Anyone?
You don't walk away.
You don't walk away. What if you don't have the funds to stay?
Well, that's the problem.
That's the problem.
Yes.
Okay. So how do you stay connected if you have to physically walk away?
Well, we have an internet now.
Okay.
And you actually can get internet in parts of the jungle of Africa.
Oh, yeah.
So you can do remote mentorship
Okay.
and checking in and add real-time problem solving. Yep. So you can do that to a certain extent with certain types of problems.
Certain extent with certain types of problems. Do you find that if you have this mentorship program that the people are more likely to continue to do what it is that you've trained them to do?
Depends on the person and your relationship.
Okay.
I think also it depends on what you say. If you train them, and then when you left, the boss come over and now give them different assignment. So what you're training them is no longer actually their responsibility. They have to focus on what their boss is doing.
Right, absolutely. That goes back to the stick, gone,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
Programs that I think have some advantage are those where you're training trainers. So
Training trainers.
Ongoing
Okay.
training resource within the local environment, as opposed to you always having to come and they're always relying on you. You're setting up the infrastructure there.
So how do you
Resources.
reach back, and this is not an inquisition, how do you reach back and make sure that they are training other people? Is there an accountability thing on their end to do that? Is there an accountability thing for the organization that you're pulling this person from? You understand the question? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But it's got to be within that community. It can't be
Right.
accountable to you 3,000, 6,000 miles away.
Right. So one of the things that I have found as an ongoing rule is you have to be willing to jump out of your own boat before you expect people to jump into yours. And this has to do with understanding about what these issues are and how to go back to the adaptability part on that, making it local, practical, and sustainable, is to have an upfront understanding that these are the things that might occur. In fact, the probabilities of them occurring are pretty good, where the boss is going to give them another assignment when they get back, or that they're going to be catching up, or that they're going to be accountable to the organization that, in terms of that training. I can't imagine anything worse than going through a thing about training people and then they really don't have the opportunity to train people. And one of the things that happens is that, and this is strictly anecdotal again, don't have that $1 million study to back it up, but in developing world countries, they are apt to participate in external training programs. In other words, your organization comes in and trains, and they are apt to send people to do that training. They are less apt to set aside training program because of that lack of human resource capacity. They are less likely to set aside time for one of their own to do training with their own. Even though that's really the best way to make these happen, is to have that trainer as a local, because then it's not that face, and then it doesn't carry the same message, and there's all sorts of things. One of the things that we have done is we promote what we call the duty of care. This is one of those things that I try to take the politics out of the discussion. And duty of care is something that's rather common to the world, and I want to take it out of its legalistic thing about, you can get sued. But the roots of duty of care is that if you do anything that creates a risk for anybody, you have a moral and ethical responsibility to mitigate that risk to the best of your ability. Again, if you do anything that creates a risk, you have a moral and ethical responsibility to mitigate that risk to the best of your ability. So when you walk into a building and somebody spilt water on the floor and they put up a sign about that has to do with that. Now, sometimes there's a legalistic response to that, but the human story is that we do that. The human story is that we do that. If I have cleaning supplies in my house, and I got 4 grandchildren in my house, I need to do something to keep my grandchildren from getting in to the Tide Pods or whatever it is they might get into, Doesn't matter what the law is. Simply, it's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter if somebody might get on a plane and go somewhere. It's the right thing to do is to mitigate the risks for where you are in the immediate environment, regardless of the politics, regardless of the situation. It's just simply what people do. I watch parents all over the world hold their children's hands when they walk across the street, not because it's the law that they do it, but because they're putting a child at risk and they're doing what they can to mitigate that risk. And if you start with that as a basic assumption, you have responsible people. And if you have responsible people, you have responsible science. So I shared doing a leadership training program at the Asia Pacific with Julie Fisher, and she's in Malaysia today, by the way, so I'm wearing my Malaysia tie in her honor. But to me, one of the answers to this is you don't only train people in the technical part, but a vital ingredient that we have missing in many of these programs is training people in leadership. Because the leadership part is, oftentimes people come from situations where leadership comes by birth. It does not come by talent. So we're not talking necessarily about leadership by title, but we're talking about leadership by how do you effectively make change where you are. Because there are people who make extremely effective changes in society who are leaders of almost nothing. Think about this the other day. You got a pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Just another Baptist church. Live in my part of the world, you can't throw a rock and not hit a Baptist church. Change comes about because of leadership, wherever it is. And we're missing, in a lot of our programs, we're missing golden opportunities when we're training people in those technical things that they need to have by not training them in the soft skill side of leadership and how to make effective changes where they are. One of the things that we talk about our connection with the global health security agenda and in these other type programs, and I want to reach into these kind of things and say, you need an action package on leadership. If there's an action package missing, it's leadership. It's how can people take these talents where they are and get these programs going and sustained where they are. Because they cannot rely on the first world to keep doing that. Because our political interests shift every time the wind blows, as do our financial interests. That's the reality of it. And if this is going to be sustainable, are we prepared? If the answer is going to say yes, it doesn't require the leadership of WHO or OIE or FAO or the United States or the G7 or whatever. It depends on the leadership that they have where they are and the people who are promoting it where they are as being something that is important to them. It's not merely coal falling off the coal car going through a poor community. We have to engage in forward thinking. A lot of what we do is we train people to react. Leadership is about planning. Leadership is about developing goals and meeting them. Again, where they are, establishing their own. This JEE thing is a wonderful. I just sit there and I go, this is just such a powerful tool to help you sit down. Imagine having a leadership training class, take your JEE thing in there and go, how are we going to make this happen? Showing up at a World Bank meeting, that's cool, but it's not going to make it happen. Right? What's a plan? What's your business plan to make this happen? Who are the people we need to have in the room? You know, who's missing? All those sorts of things. What are communication techniques? I asked, before I did one of the leadership things, I asked people whom I consider leaders in my life, you know, some of the things, what do you think are necessary qualities in being leaders? And these, I'm sorry for the small print, but this is kind of like in the order that people, going this way, in the order that people gave answers. And at the top of that list was responses like that they are ethical, that they are moral, that they have integrity. And I went, oh yeah, duty of care. Okay? How about going and say it's just the right thing to do? Forget about saying it's just the right thing to do. It's the right thing for us to do to prepare in our country. It's the right thing to do, prepare for an infectious disease outbreak in our country, for the people in our country. It's the right thing to do to prepare for the things in livestock populations, things like that, because the people in our country depend on that. Forget what it does to the global economy. It's the right thing to do because the guy's your neighbor. So we're now talking about the future of the global health security agenda, and I can't part without showing this cartoon. It's one thing to talk it, it's another thing to fund it. Right? So we're going to use our little polar bear over here as the infectious disease guy. And here we are with the global health security agenda with our beachfront property. It takes more than talk. It takes action. Action takes money. And we can't put anything together unless there is financial will, where there is emotional will. And if there's anything that moves financial will, it is emotional will. Because we will spend money on things we want to spend money on, even if we can't afford it. There's not a person in this room who hasn't bought a gift for somebody that they couldn't afford. But they did it because they wanted to do it. That doesn't just work in one-on-one relationships. It works with people and governments and larger entities as well. It takes leadership to develop that emotional will, to drive the political will to spend the money. I really appreciate you all spending your morning with me. I've got questions, comments, all that. I know some of you probably have to go to wherever it is you need to go. And I always try to quit on time, and I did that. But I'm in no rush to go anywhere. I don't have a plane to catch. I just have a car to get into and drive back south. So if you want to talk, let's talk. If you need to leave, please, feel free to do that. Thank you all very much.